Well, for the first time in over 5 years, I will not be doing a live stream covering the patch notes for a major update for ESO. It's not out of spite or because I don't feel like it. There simply isn't anything to cover. We already found out on the ESO live stream on Thursday that there won't be any new quality of life changes coming.
I will say I see a lot of people asking about, quality of life stuff. Aside from the zone, what we talked about here, it honestly is a little bit lighter than some of the previous updates. The team has been really focused on a lot of stuff that's coming next year. It's not super satisfying to be like, oh, it's next year things, but there are a lot of really cool things that are in progress that we're excited to get into once we start talking about everything coming next year.
And then they showed this list of the notable Update 48 combat bug fixes and adjustments. The biggest change happening here for combat is that we can drink potions now mid-Fate Carver Beam or Heavy Attack. This is a decent change, don't get me wrong, but after all the feedback given regarding subclassing since its release, they have done next to nothing to alleviate the pain points that it introduced. At a minimum, this means that we'll be waiting until 2026 for any meaningful adjustments to subclassing, which hit the PTS in April of 2025. And to be blunt, it's shameful and unacceptable that they continue to roll out new systems that are left in unfinished states. And given their track record with previous systems, at this point, I don't have much confidence that the class skill lines will ever receive the care and attention that they need. And I'll be honest, I don't have the energy to keep fighting for something that isn't happening. People have complained since April that running a non-subclass is miles behind the rest. Nothing has been done to fix that. People have complained since April that many skill lines are not up to par with subclassing and they have fun abilities in them that are no longer used. Nothing has been done to fix that. We are screaming into the void. But after the recent Ask Us Anything event that was held by the developers on Reddit, we do have a better glimpse into the kind of thinking that is steering this ship for combat. And I'm putting it very nicely when I say it does not inspire confidence. I do appreciate the developers hosting events like this, and not all of the responses to the questions were bad. I'll cover some of the good stuff too, but let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first post I wrote said, ZOS has earned a bit of a track record of getting things close to a finished product, but leaving it feeling like it is only 85% of the way there. Hybridization still hasn't been finished years later. Infinite Archive still has no way to save progress. Hundreds of gear sets left in a place where there are no good uses for them. It feels like we keep stacking the next new thing on top, but still so much needs to be cleaned up. Do you guys plan on making stuff like this a priority? And if so, how do you go about getting this right? So I'll start with some of the more positive responses. Philip Draven, Gameplay Design Director, said, absolutely, we're excited to be able to dive into this with y'all. In terms of the new features, there's always more we want to do, and we'll often add various quality of life improvements for past features over time, but sometimes certain things end up being more involved or riskier than we originally estimated. It's a tough balancing between revisiting older features and adding in new cool stuff, and every player is going to prioritize those efforts differently. I can say that we have a lot of upcoming improvements to various existing aspects of the game we're excited about. We are also looking at ways to reward long-term investment in the game. So for example, there could be more reasons to collect item sets beyond just their immediate use. So not really anything concrete there, but game director Nick Giacomini also replied with, that's a great question, and it's something we've been discussing a lot recently. Phil covered our thoughts on this well. What I'll add is that in the past, I think we focused too much on the next thing, which has led to some systems and content falling behind. Part of our new philosophy is to adopt a more iterative approach. Our hope is to release, listen closely to feedback, and try to quickly improve based on what we hear. So hopefully that helps with what we release going forward. But our vision of evolution, not revolution, means we will absolutely be revisiting and making improvements to existing systems. I think this is a core part of creating a rewarding experience for all players. Again, no concrete details, which I do hope to see soon from ZOS, but I did appreciate the response here and agree with the overall idea of it. I think he's correct to call out that in the past they have generally focused too much on the next new thing. So those responses were fine, not as detailed as I would have hoped, but they at least seemed pointed in the right direction. And here is where things start to get a little silly. Combat and PvP Director Brian Wheeler responded to my question with this. Regarding consumables, we had recently dug into adjusting the values of consumables to fit within our adjusted combat values we've been applying since 2019 and found it would have been far more detrimental to make some of the changes necessary and almost needlessly so. Many of the consumables would have needed to be nerfed, in some cases extremely so. It was determined in those discussions that it would not be seen as a net positive change despite aligning with our hybridization efforts, so we are looking into other avenues for consumable balance changes in the future. Throughout that process, however, we did tackle a lot of long-standing bugs regarding improper tooltip information and other UI issues. Okay, wow, there's a lot to dig into here. So first off, I was just asking about hybridization and that not being finished up, and he went into this talk about completely rebalancing consumables. So we can look back at this post from January 2022, where they said, we'll be dual sourcing buffs on abilities and item sets like Major Prophecy with Major Savagery, with the same thing applying to Brutality and Sorcery. In the long term, we plan on simply merging these bonuses so there are fewer names and effects you need to worry about, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that will result from that. As such, it may take quite some time before we're able to do that. Quite some time indeed, considering it has been almost 4 years since this post. So back to Brian's response, with consumables, hybridization would just mean combining these buffs so that they're properly hybridized. While I wouldn't mind a consumable rework so that the system is more interesting, I think there is a lot of room for improvement there. I don't at all understand what any of that has to do with needing to nerf consumables. He said many of the consumables would have needed to be nerfed, in some cases extremely so. But why? You don't have to do any of that. I really liked the responses from Creative Excuses and Code. Creative said you can even have an imbalance between food and sets, or food and potions, or potions and sets, because they don't compete with each other. They compete with other things in their categories. And Code said, yeah, okay, that consumable thing makes no sense. Yes, eating a food gives you more stats than the 2 to 4 piece on an armor set, and that's bad because... Just make a new rule that says consumables, since they are temporary, are supposed to be more powerful than permanent things. And then Zeeb said, exactly, the damage even on a white weapon is double a 5-piece set. Do we need to nerf that as well? It's such a weird way to think about things. It's just wild to me that they're so boxed in with stuff like this and feel so beholden to some spreadsheet formula, which has obviously failed us to this point. For the next half of his post, he wrote, regarding gear, that's a very subjective thing regarding what's viable or not, as every set has a place in ESO depending if you like trials, PvP, or just roaming around gathering or crafting. Wow, I don't know how he can even say that. Every set has a place in ESO? That's not even close to being true. Moving on, he said some sets may be seen as optimal for some content versus others, but again, that's a subjective viewpoint tied to activity engagement. Are there some sets that are better for PvP versus trials? Absolutely. That's not to say we won't look at itemization and how to make it exciting going forward, but going back and simply buffing underutilized sets is simply going to create an arms race or increase vertical power beyond what works within balance limits. Again, this just doesn't even make sense. How would improving something that is underperforming up to a usable level create more vertical power? Then he said, now if we alter those balance limits for content, we could revisit all item sets or work on other methods of giving people power to compensate for the higher needs to complete the content. For now, however, that is not in the plans. It's so wild. It's almost like they view this to be an all or nothing thing, like all of the sets are currently perfectly balanced and the only way they would adjust it is if the spreadsheet allowed for more growth. This is so far out of touch from the reality of what is going on with itemization in ESO, and it's a really wild way to handle a game in general. So I'll show you guys my response here and the bit of back and forth that we had on Reddit. For the consumables, you're saying that they can't be adjusted because of some arbitrary limitations that you guys have put in place. You realize you make all the rules, right? Better is better. It doesn't have to fit into some imaginary box. As far as set balance, I understand not every set is made for every scenario. Of course not. It's not about creating an arms race. It's about sets that have no place. How would making sets usable increase the vertical power and not the horizontal? Are you guys really happy with the current state of item sets? I could sit down with you guys for a couple hours and go through at least a couple hundred sets and easy adjustments that could make them usable again. He responded with, we are actively talking about other methods of rewarding people outside of item sets, but also if we can, how we can revitalize interest in item sets that currently exist, but not simply going back and buffing, altering old item sets. I think this is a bad idea, but I'll keep going on. The limitations on the balance numbers were put in place on abilities and item sets over the years to have standards applied across the board as opposed to randomly assigned values. They don't need to be randomly assigned. They need to be adjusted for the current state of the game. Content teams have built around those standards over the years as well, to which admittedly subclassing and subsequent patches have disrupted a bit, and we expected some of that. We're working to address that as well with long-term plans. The issue with consumables at the moment is their current values were originally assigned long before today's standards were put in place. Adjusting consumables to current standards, aka adjusting them to be balanced to the rest of the game, including content, would have resulted in a large loss of power, which we deemed not a solid win for players. We can't just adjust the math to make those better. Yes, you can, but because then those would be out of whack with the rest of abilities and items. Everything is connected that way, thus causing a greater imbalance. This is just, are you guys hearing how crazy this sounds? So the consumables are okay as they are, but if they make adjustments, those adjustments have to be negative because of some standards in place. Someone please make it make sense. So in my response here, the first part is in response to them adding more incentive to collect item sets outside of making those sets viable. I said, not gonna lie, this sounds like adding more to the current issues we are facing, stack more new reasons to want gear on top of an incredibly unsturdy foundation instead of fixing the foundation. Make the gear good and interesting across the board, that is the answer. Then go and add incentives on top of it after that is in place. The whole consumables talk actually blows my mind. So you can't adjust them because if you did, then you have to adjust to new standards and nerf them because if you didn't nerf them, they'd be out of balance. Yet they are okay unadjusted as is. Do you hear how wacky that sounds? Maybe this spreadsheet isn't so accurate if it's left us in the current state we're in. End of the day, you don't have to do anything. We just want fun and exciting stuff to engage with. Obviously, the whole spreadsheet balance everything just isn't working. You guys are pinning yourselves into a tiny little space when the world is your oyster. And I'm definitely not the only one feeling this way. Looking through some of the community discussion after this Reddit event, Creative Excuses said, very unhappy with Wheeler's comments. What do you mean consumables would have to be nerfed? Consumables are boring as they stand. They don't need nerfs at all, no matter what a spreadsheet says, LOL. They have been virtually untouched for 5+ years, and no one has ever said, damn, that food is overpowered, or damn, that potion was so overwhelmingly good, or damn, that poison is so good, I'm going to run it all the time in all places. Then Pluvio said, genuinely, what is Wheeler even talking about adjusting values of consumables? All I've seen asked for in regards to consumables is hybridizing the buffs, like giving both Major Prophecy and Savagery on a Magicka Restore pod. In what world would this be imbalanced? Am I misunderstanding? Scrum said, yeah, it makes no sense, but every other source for the buffs gives both. So I responded to Pluvio with this, because if they tweak the numbers, then that means they have to adhere to the new rules. But if they don't touch it, they can put it in a drawer and pretend it doesn't exist. It's actually insane that this is how they're looking at stuff. Paradox Druid said, this is a masterclass in not understanding your own game. Very unfortunate. ESO Nightingale said, I took so much brain damage after reading basically indifference on item sets being mostly garbage. Genuinely, most of them do not have any reason to exist. Why do they waste development time on useless items? And this seems to be the general consensus overall around this topic. So to sum it up, Zoss doesn't see an issue with item sets and instead of fixing their balance, would like to add some sort of meta reward on top of the collection process instead. And for consumables, they don't want to adjust them because they feel like if they do, they'd have to heavily nerf them. It's just such a wild way to go about handling this. I'm definitely open to more discussion on this. If any of the Zoss employees would like to engage in a conversation to work through this better, please let me know. I'd be happy to do that. But it doesn't stop there. I had another question that was answered. One really frustrating thing for players, especially those that are working on progressing through more difficult content, is when power is taken away. This is always done in the name of balance, but it feels though the player and their time is not respected when this happens. Often this can prolong progressions by months or lead to teams being disbanded. I realize ESO is meant to be a horizontal progression MMO and not vertical, but it feels absolutely unacceptable to have a new piece of content come out. The best players in the world get to tackle it at a certain level of power, then players that are later still struggling through it get hit with nerfs and have to work even harder to accomplish it. This should never be the direction. If you look at an MMO like World of Warcraft, the new raid is the hardest it will ever be the first couple of weeks of release and then slowly gets more and more accessible. ESO often goes in the reverse of this. So my question to the new leadership is this a problem that you guys have looked at? If not, would you be willing to? If so, what are your thoughts on how to better handle this in a way that fits in with the horizontal progression of ESO? Brian responded here with, regarding horizontal, we are aware that horizontal progression does have its limits, however, and have been looking at ways to give players something exciting and not the standard rewards we have in the past. Regarding balance in general, we definitely understand the frustration points on this and working on trying to mitigate that as much as possible. With ESO having both PvE and PvP in the same world, we've had to adjust abilities for both when outliers occur. You don't have to do that though. Builds show off higher DPS, healing, tanking than desired for the content, PvP, etc. This creates an ever-changing, never fully equally balanced world out there, and this is something that we work with as best we can. We do intend going forward to try and retain the power level as best we can for players so that situations don't arise where people could finish content one update, but then not the next. However, this is looking mostly through the viewpoint of the majority of players out there and not the top end. So that last statement there, I'm not sure exactly what he means, but it sounds like he's not saying they don't want to nerf players, but instead they don't want to add any power in for players. And I think this is a formula for long-term disaster. It's a little hard to decipher what he means exactly though by retaining the power and then also through the viewpoint of the majority of players, not the top end. Like, what do they even consider the top end? To me, that's like the top few hundred players in the world. To them, that might be anyone that's even doing hard mode trials at all. I have no idea. So back to that comment he made about having to adjust abilities for both when outliers occur. So I responded to that. 2 monsters and battle spirit bonuses are ones you guys have dabbled in, but could use a lot more to help with this. If you keep trying to adjust everything for both simultaneously, you'll keep having both sides be worse versions of what they could be. And then Nick said, that's a great observation. You've hit a core issue we've been discussing. We don't want both sides to be worse versions of themselves, and we think we can do better. We're actively reevaluating our approach to this and are committed to finding a better way forward. So I definitely appreciate Nick mentioning that this is an issue and that they have been discussing it. I think there are a lot of old philosophies there at ZOS that are outdated and don't fit in with today's game, and it's time to step into 2025 with it. Overall, the new leadership there's a new studio director, game director, executive producer. This does give me some hope that a lot of these anti-player philosophies that have stuck with ZOS will finally be removed, but only time will tell on that. There are still quite a few higher ups on the team there that seem to be stuck in some really strange ways of thinking about this game that do not align with the community's wants or the overall landscape of gaming here in 2025. So hopefully they'll either be able to get on board with the new leadership or find a different game and community to work with that better aligns with their vision. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you all think about the lack of changes in the patch notes for this major update. And also, how did y'all feel about these conversations on Reddit? I will still definitely cover any significant changes that come, especially if they inspire confidence in the future direction of the game. In the meantime, come catch me live on Twitch if you want to chat about it. I'll be streaming a bit of variety over there. Big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. I really appreciate the support. And a special thanks to these folks here. I couldn't keep doing this without you. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.